Hi everyone, this is my oral assessment. My name is Ella Black, and today I'm going to be discussing how much debt can the US be in without losing our privilege as being one of the richest countries in the world. So to begin, we need to discuss how much debt we are currently in. And at the end of the fiscal year 2019, that number was $22.8 trillion. Economists have predicted that this will rise in the upcoming years. If our GDP growth can't keep up, at what level of debt to GDP will this negatively affect our country? It's very important to find an answer to this question because if we can't pay for our debt, other countries will begin to lose faith in the US government. The demand for our treasury bonds will decrease and hinder economic growth being fueled by government spending. If the US is unable to fund the deficit, the government will raise taxes on citizens that will reduce capital and in turn lower international trade. This clashes with the hopes that trade will make everyone better off and is an example of how the demand for investment in the US will decrease. So to begin, I just want to clarify that the amount of debt itself is not the issue, it's the debt to GDP ratio that matters. A low debt to GDP ratio indicates an economy that produces and sells goods and is sufficient to pay back debts without incurring further debt. A low debt to GDP ratio is what's needed for a country to be wealthy. So if this ratio becomes too high, there will be a negative impact on the US economy. One of the ways that the government funds its spending is through issuing treasury bonds. This is an example of the government interfering in attempting to improve economic growth, and it's worked. However, if the debt to GDP ratio becomes too high, there will be less demand for T-bonds, which will cause higher interest rates. This will make it difficult for the US to raise the debt and will result in low government spending. The lower the government spending leads to lower economic growth. This is harmful because economic and GDP growth are the measures that determine the wealth of a country. If the US begins to lose countries to buy our bonds, we will no longer be able to use deficit spending to fund the debt. In turn, we will need to use US dollars, which will cause an inflation. This depreciates the value of the US dollar, which will plummet our country into a recession. With the recent rise in the debt to GDP growth in America and predicted trends, it seems that we are on track to become at risk of an economic decline. So this graph right here just depicts the predicted growth of the US gross debt to GDP. And as we can see, it's steadily rising and is expected to continue rising in the upcoming years. And this is going to become dangerous because it can reach a point that makes it hard to issue large amounts of new debt at low interest rates. And like I said before, the higher the interest rates, the worse effect it will have on our economy. So we want to keep the interest rates as low as possible. The answer to this question is limited mainly just by the unknown of the future. We have no way of knowing what the economic activity or political stability of our country and others is going to look like. In order for this response to be incorrect, we have to assume that the US GDP will continue to grow enough to instill confidence in our treasury bond buyers, which would allow us to continue issuing treasuries at a low rate and raising our debt. Additionally, we would have to consider that no other countries would be experiencing economic growth and they wouldn't rise above the US, which would cause our bond buyers to back away from investing in the country. Both of these things are highly unlikely, which instills confidence in my answer, as well as the predicted trends in the rise of our debt to GDP. These are reliable indicators that we will soon be unable to continue raising our debt. So these are the sources that I used to gather my information, and to sum everything up, if the US continues to acquire debt at the rate that we are acquiring, and we aren't able to keep up with our GDP, it'll throw us into a lower economic ranking and it'll take away our standing as being one of the richest countries in the world. Thank you.